straight academic track at the Harvard Medical School, and I was nominated for early full professorship, which in fact was turned down because marijuana reconsidered was considered too controversial. I had actually started to work on this in 1966, and the circumstances were this. Carl Sagan and I met at a anti-Vietnam War activity. We were both involved in opposing that war. We ultimately became each other's best friend. But in the first time I was invited to a party at his place in Cambridge, I saw someone smoking a marijuana cigarette. I had never even seen a joint before. And it was Carl Sagan who was smoking it, plus a number of his friends. I could scarcely believe this, and I said to Carl, you know, you shouldn't be smoking that. That's very harmful. That's really going to be detriment to your health. You ought to stop. And Carl took a puff, and he looked at me and he said, oh, Lester, have a puff. It's harmless, and you'll love it. Well, you know, it wasn't just that Carl used it, but these were not unsophisticated people that I met more and more through him, and many of them used marijuana. You know, I decided, well, I had to ask myself, what is the basis of my believing that it's harmful? Where's the data? And it was clear that I didn't have any data. I was just mouthing what the general consensus in medicine was, that it's harmful. So I decided to go into the Harvard Medical School library and find the medical and scientific basis for this disastrous prohibition, which even then had arrested over 300,000 people, most of them young, about 89% of them from mere possession. This was really pressing on me. And so I went in there to find the basis for this because it had to be justified. And lo and behold, as I worked in that library, it wasn't long before I had an epiphany. I had been 180 degrees off. I was wrong, completely wrong. And in fact, by the time I finished the work, and this was published in Scientific American, and it in December of 1969, and it created a sensation. My wife and I were listening to the 11 o'clock news. Harvard professor, I wasn't a full professor, Harvard professor says marijuana not harmful.
So you found out that you'd been brainwashed like everybody else about cannabis, and
Exactly.
did you feel a little duped?
I did, and, you know, I was going to leave it there, but the Scientific American article attracted so much attention. The three different publishers came to my office and asked if I would do a book. I had already now expanded it into an 80-page paper, which was published in an international journal of psychiatry, and they said, would you do it, cut it down, and we'll make it... that was cut down and made into the Scientific American article, and that really attracted these publishers. And to make a long story short, I decided to do it for two reasons. I decided to go with Harvard University Press, and the two reasons were, one, that my son, who was ill with acute lymphocytic leukemia, this was the only subject that I worked on at home that he was ever interested in. And he was very interested in it. And two, I found that the fact that I had been duped meant that someone ought to try and pull this together so people can understand this drug is not a terribly toxic drug. In fact, it is remarkable for its lack of toxicity. It is the least toxic drug that I know of, including all of those in the pharmacopoeia. So I started to work on this book with the understanding that they would have a copy for me, and bound copy in November 24th, 1971. And my part of the contract was to get it in sooner than they ordinarily required. We both kept our sides of that contract, and I did have a book in my hands by that date. And that's the improbable way in which I got hooked on studying marijuana. Now, that's not the only thing I've done in my life. I've published 10 books.
Absolutely. We're all very thankful. I'm sure that most of my listeners are aware of the work that you've been doing over the years. You quickly touched on, but can you tell me a little bit about your own personal experience with cannabis and of your son, Danny?
Well, the personal experience is divided into two parts with Danny and then my own use of marijuana.
Surely.
Now, the Danny thing goes like this. When Danny got sick, I went to the head of childhood oncology department, Sidney Farber, who had been my professor at Harvard Medical School, and asked him if he would take care of him, and he did, but he retired not long after that. And when his successor was chosen, I was invited to a dinner party to meet him. And at dinner party, he said to me, Dr. Grinspoon, I've read your book. It had a chapter on medicine, on 19th century medicine, really, when it was used as medicine in this country as a liquid. I have a 17-year-old boy who really would struggle when we had to give him his medicine because he couldn't stand the nausea and vomiting.
And the medicine, please inform people, what was his ailment?
The cancer chemotherapeutic stuff. Cancer chemotherapies most of them make you very nauseated. And he said that one day this kid, let's call him Stephen, came in and he got up on the gurney without a fuss. They gave him the injection. He saluted them, hey, gents, see you in 2 weeks. And he went off very pleasantly. And this new man on the faculty said he was completely puzzled. Now, I read the chapter you wrote in Marijuana Reconsidered. Is that consistent with what you wrote then? I said, yes. They used it for nausea, but nobody knows about how effective it is in the nausea which is created. It's such a severe nausea and for many of these cancer chemotherapeutics. But I suspect it would be useful. On the way home, my wife said to me, Daddy's got another appointment and next week or whatever. Shouldn't we get him some marijuana and let him see if this is useful? And I'm almost ashamed to say this. I said, no, it's against the law. And we don't want to offend the people at the Jimmy Fund building who are taking such great care of him. And that was the end of it. Well, I see he got his treatment at the Children's Hospital. All the Harvard Medical, many of the hospitals are right all around the medical school. And mine office was right just a block away from the Children's Hospital. So I meet them in the treatment room, and he got his treatments. I walked in, they were already there waiting for the injection. And this time, instead of being, having anxiety exuding from the facial expressions of both, they were chatting and having fun. And I said, hey, let me in on the joke here. What's going on? And I finally learned. I thought that they weren't saying anything then, but he got up on the gurney. He had the injection. He got off, and they went out to the car and went home. And then she related to me that not only did he would usually go home to his bed and it'd be a big bucket, and for 8 hours he'd have first vomiting and then just awful dry heaves. This time, as they got to Wellesley, he said, hey, Mom, I'd rather go to school. I'm feeling fine.
So Danny was having a great reaction to the medication, obviously.
Yes, it relieved our anxiety about his suffering from that nausea and vomiting. And for him, it was a godsend, because that was the part of his treatment which he had so much anxiety about.
So that was just the beginning of your positive association with marijuana. And you know what? We're going to take a quick break to talk to our sponsors. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And we'll be right back to talk some more with Dr. Lester Grinspoon.
The Grow Show with Kyle Cushman will return once we cultivate through this short commercial break.
Dr. Dabber, hurry. Its temperature is shooting past 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's burning up.
I'm afraid for this little guy, it's just too late.
What caused the problem?
Only Dr. Dabber can maintain the perfect temperature for a smooth-tasting, slower burn. This standard vaporizer lost all of its health benefits, sending it up in smoke.
So you're telling me that most vapor pens burn so hot they produce smoke, not vapor?
Correct. Keep away from those standard vaporizer pens and turn to Dr. Dabber. Doctor's orders.
Less heat, more flavor.
Ganjapreneur.com, your guide to the cannabis business world. Ganjapreneur.com is a comprehensive resource for cannabis professionals and entrepreneurs. Download the Ganjapreneur app on your smartphone or tablet to catch up on cannabis industry news, scroll through our daily job listings, and learn about successful cannabis companies, executives, and investors. Ganjapreneur.com, helping ganjapreneurs grow.
Educator, author, and advocate Dr. Mitch Earlywine is here to tackle the burning issues.
And I'm here to clear up the myths about cannabis and burn them away with science.
CannabisRadio.com presents a no-holds-barred platform that seeks to redefine and revolutionize the entire scope of the cannabis culture while opening the door for more to join the cannabis crusade.
Dr. Kevin Hill.
You can't ignore the fact that, like alcohol, most people who use don't have a problem. So I think that you need to think about policy in that way while educating people properly about marijuana. I think that's the way to go.
Burning Issues, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Time to plant some more conversational seeds. You're listening to The Grow Show with Kyle Cushman, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Grow Show on CannabisRadio.com. We are talking with Dr. Lester Grinspoon, professor at Harvard School of Psychiatry. Dr. Grinspoon, you were just telling us about your initial experiences with treating your son, Danny, with cannabis that helped change your impressions of the usefulness of cannabis. Can you tell me specifically, how did you come to the conclusion that you were initially wrong about cannabis being dangerous?
Well, it was a matter of getting in the library and reading the papers which have been written on it. And, between 1850 and 1900, I counted almost 100 papers. And there weren't many modern ones, but there was no question in my mind about the toxicity issue. That was a red flag that had no meaning because, as I said, one of the things that's remarkable about cannabis is how limited it is in its toxicity. There has never been a recorded death from an overdose of cannabis anywhere in the world. And we know its use goes back many centuries. So it is, first of all, a safe drug. And the second big lesson I had about marijuana is that it was useful. It was useful as a recreational drug. Everybody knows about that. But I was beginning with not just the literature from the 19th century, but with my experience with Danny, it was preying on my mind to start to look at what this represents as a medicine. But there wasn't enough data around at that time, and I decided to postpone that. And finally began that book in 1993, and there still wasn't much data around, but there were a lot of personal reports about it.
So early on, you obviously saw through the red journalism campaign that was being perpetrated by the government. How soon did you have your first personal experience with marijuana?
Well, it went like this. As I was going back now to the work, I went into after that paper was published in Scientific American, and I started to work on the Harvard University book, Marijuana Reconsidered. I covered everything in that book, from the chemistry to the ways in which it was used. And I read the accounts of Le Club des, the members of Le Club des Hashishan, like Gaudier, and others. I read the Americans like Gaylord Taylor, and in fact my friend Carl Sagan, under the false name of Mr. X, wrote a wonderful essay about the way in which he finds it. And I said to myself, hey, this stuff sounds interesting. I'm going to try it. But I also recognize that if the book were successful, here's a book saying that marijuana is not only not very toxic, but it may be